Full Employment Act is passed, which commits the federal government to seeing to it that there's full employment. We need to go back to the New Deal idea of if private enterprise won't create jobs for people, then the government will create jobs for people. Guarantee employment to anybody who wants to work. Now, of course, that takes money. Roosevelt had to spend money in order to create public works programs, and he had to go into debt, and he had to unbalance the budget, and we have to get away from the fixation of balanced budget, and also we have to make it clear that the money for full employment exists. The money is there. It's there, as I said before, in the military budget. It's there in the huge amount of wealth concentrated at the top, solving the problem of employment will immediately have an effect on the wage structure all over the country, because one of the reasons wages have been going down is because of this great surplus of labor, I think that's crucial.
Now, you mentioned the earlier populist movement of the last century. What have we learned from history which will help this populist movement to succeed where others have failed?
Well, we've had failed movements and we've had successful movements, we've had failed third-party movements, and we've had successful social movements. And I think it's the link between the two that's important. But one thing we can learn from the movements of the last 20 or 30 years, that is the anti-war movement, the women's movement, the civil rights movement, the gay and lesbian movement, the disabled people's movement, what we can learn from them is that obstacles which seemed insuperable, the power of the government, the power of sort of entrenched groups could be overcome if enough people organized and persistently stuck at it. All of these movements started out with very small numbers of people, and their situation seemed hopeless. I mean, what could seem more hopeless than for black people in Mississippi to change the power structure of Mississippi? Or what could seem more hopeless than for a handful of anti-war people in 1965 to transform itself into a national movement that could help bring the war to an end? And I think the great lesson of those movements is that for people not to despair, that small movements become great movements if people persist. And it's very small acts engaged in by large numbers of people begin to multiply and begin to connect with one another, and then you get surprises, good ones.
Well, that's encouraging. A large majority of the potential voters did not participate in the last general election. How can the Alliance hope to overcome the widespread apathy and discouragement of people in the face of the economic and political strength of those running the system?
Yeah, well, the political system is controlled by wealth, and it's also dependent on these regulations that exist in all of the states, which make it very, very difficult for third parties to get on the ballot. And so it's going to take a lot of work for any movement to break through these regulations and to make up for the lack of money with people. Now Perot, what Perot did was to use his money, his huge amounts of money, to get large numbers of people to work for him. A new political movement has to get large numbers of people to work for it without the money, based on their enthusiasm and their moral convictions. But I think it can be done.
Do you have any suggestions on how to help a fledgling alliance group like ours? We had 28 people at our last meeting to survive and to grow.
Well, the New England Anti-Slavery Society started with like 7 people, the first subscribers to Garrison's Liberator, and they must have felt exactly the same way as you do, even though I haven't talked to them lately. But they, it's a matter of appealing to other people in the community around issues that you think they care about, bringing them together more and more, becoming more visible, getting out there, letting people see who you are, getting on radio and television, writing more letters to the editor, becoming a visible force in the community. And I think that there's a very large potential of people out there who feel exactly the same way that people in the Alliance do. There's a huge amount of alienation in this country right now from the political process, huge amount of disillusionment with the way the economic system is working. And I think if they hear about a group that speaks the things that are in their mind and say, well, there is a group that believes in the same things I do and that is out there, I think you'll find people coming around.
A week ago, I went on the Fight the Right march that the National Organization of Women had sponsored in San Francisco, and there were over 600 organizations that sponsored that. Would you address the possibility that networking could be one of the major tools of the Alliance and of local alliances in bringing already formed groups together with a common agenda?
There are now thousands of groups all over the country. There's the way in which the 60s, the movements of the 60s have been romanticized. Actually, we have many, many more local organizations now around the country than we had in the 60s. Many more. Thousands of them on all sorts of issues: women's issues, gay rights issues, environmental issues, anti-war issues, and so on. And the real problem is to bring them together, and to bring them together around central issues, as you were saying about this group. In early June, there's going to be a gathering in Washington around the issue of the rights of children. And they're going to try to bring 1 million people to Washington to speak for children. And I mean, there's a common denominator. Almost all of us have been children. I'm trying to think of who hasn't. And clearly, children are the first victims of cutbacks in social services, in education and health, and so on. Mm-hmm. And so, when I think of networking, I think of the fact that this children's march has already been endorsed by hundreds and hundreds of organizations around the country. I think well, look at the Million Man March. With whatever qualms you have about Farrakhan and his ideology, the fact is that huge numbers of black men around the country came to Washington, and I don't think they came because of Farrakhan. They came because something in their lives impelled them to want to make a statement about how they're living now and how they want to live. And somebody created the opportunity for them. Somebody said, here's the time, here's the place, come. And so I think the possibilities for applying that to other issues are there.
That's really all the time we have for questions now. I want to thank you, Howard, for your willingness to share your thoughts with us this morning. I also want to thank Mr. Martin Bennett of the History Department of Santa Rosa Junior College for making this conversation possible. Thank you.
So,
well, I really
good questions.
Appreciate that. Good answer.